There was a time when integrity in competition was considered sacred, when winning through deception was universally condemned, and when character was measured by how you behaved when you thought no one was watching. But what happened on Family Feud in May 2025 would test these principles in the most unexpected way, when 39-year-old Thomas Bradley attempted to gain an unfair advantage through a carefully planned scheme that he believed would go undetected. He set in motion a confrontation that would force Steve Harvey to address not just the immediate violation, but the broader question of what we owe to fairness, to our fellow competitors, and to our own integrity. What unfolded in those next 18 minutes would leave the audience divided between outrage and forgiveness, Steve Harvey delivering one of the most powerful responses of his career, and millions of viewers reconsidering what genuine accountability looks like when someone is caught doing wrong. Before we continue with this compelling story, if you value moments that challenge us to uphold integrity even when facing temptation, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the Family Feud moments that go beyond entertainment to explore fundamental questions about honesty, fairness, and the choices we make when we think we can get away with breaking the rules. ACT 20. CHTR 45 seconds Who 4 minutes Thomas Bradley had spent 15 years as a high school mathematics teacher in suburban Chicago, Illinois. He had dedicated his career to education, teaching algebra and geometry to teenagers who often struggled to see the relevance of mathematical concepts to their daily lives. Thomas was known among his colleagues as passionate about his subject, demanding of his students, and deeply committed to academic excellence. He had won teaching awards, mentored struggling students to success, and took genuine pride in his profession and the difference he believed he was making in young people's lives. But Thomas carried something beneath his professional dedication that he had never fully examined or addressed. He had an intense, almost pathological need to win. This competitive drive had served him well in many contexts throughout his life. It had pushed him to excel academically, to earn advanced degrees, to pursue excellence in his teaching career. But it had also created blind spots in his character. Thomas believed that intelligence gave him the right to advantages that others did not deserve. He rationalized bending rules as simply being clever enough to see opportunities that less intelligent people missed. He viewed competition as a zero-sum game where only outcomes mattered, and the means of achieving those outcomes were less important than the results themselves. Thomas's wife Karen had noticed this tendency over their 12 years of marriage. She had watched him argue with referees at their son's soccer games, insisting on interpretations of rules that favored his son's team. She had seen him become irrationally angry when losing at board games with friends, often finding technicalities or disputed rules to challenge outcomes that went against him. She had listened to him justify taking credit for collaborative work projects by claiming his contributions were more significant than those of his colleagues. Karen had tried to address these behaviors, suggesting that Thomas's need to win was damaging his relationships and modeling poor values for their 2 children, but Thomas dismissed her concerns as oversensitivity. What Karen did not know was that Thomas's competitive drive had occasionally crossed lines that went beyond poor sportsmanship into actual cheating. In graduate school, he had plagiarized sections of a thesis paper, convincing himself that synthesizing existing research was essentially the same as original thinking. At work, he had taken credit for a colleague's innovative teaching method, presenting it at a conference as his own creation. In casual poker games with friends, he had occasionally palmed cards when he thought no one was looking, rationalizing that his superior intelligence entitled him to maximize his advantages. Each time, Thomas had justified his behavior with sophisticated reasoning that protected him from confronting the simple truth that he was willing to cheat to win. Thomas had gathered his family for this Family Feud appearance with a specific goal in mind. He wanted to win not just for the prize money, but to prove something to himself and to his family about his superiority and capability. The Bradley family consisted of Thomas, his wife Karen, his brother Michael, his sister-in-law Jennifer, and his 15-year-old son David. They had prepared extensively for the show, studying common Family Feud questions and practicing their buzzer timing. But Thomas had gone further in his preparation in ways his family members did not know about and would never have approved of had they known. Thomas had discovered online forums where people discussed Family Feud strategies and shared information about the show's production process. Through these forums, he had learned specific details about how the show's survey questions were generated and which demographic groups were typically surveyed. He had also learned about a technique that some unscrupulous contestants had allegedly used in the past to gain unfair advantages. The technique involved a family member in the audience using subtle hand signals to indicate which answers were likely to be on the board, based on patterns they noticed during taping. Thomas had recruited his college-age daughter Emily, who was sitting in the studio audience, to serve this role without fully explaining the ethical implications of what he was asking her to do. What Thomas did not anticipate was that his carefully planned scheme would be detected, that his attempt to gain an unfair advantage would be exposed on national television, and that he would face a confrontation that would force him to reckon with the gap between his self-perception as an ethical educator and the reality of his willingness to cheat when he thought he could avoid consequences, a confrontation that would require Steve Harvey to decide whether mercy or justice should prevail when someone's character is revealed to be fundamentally at odds with their public persona. ACT3Z. Teachisteru GGLEs for 12 minutes. The Bradley family had performed adequately through the first 2 rounds, winning one and losing one to maintain a competitive position against the opposing family. Thomas had been at the podium for several questions, and observers in the production booth had begun to notice something unusual. Thomas seemed to be glancing toward a specific section of the audience before giving his answers. The glances were brief and could have been dismissed as nervous tics, but their consistency and the timing relative to his answer delivery suggested something more intentional might be occurring. The production team communicated their observations to the floor director, who began paying closer attention to Thomas's behavior and the section of the audience he appeared to be looking toward. What they observed over the next several minutes confirmed their suspicions. A young woman in that section, later identified as Thomas's daughter Emily, was making subtle hand gestures that corresponded to the number of fingers she was holding up. The production team realized that Emily appeared to be signaling information to her father based on patterns she was detecting in how questions were being answered. The 3rd round arrived, and Thomas was at the podium for the face-off question. As Steve Harvey prepared to read the question, the floor director received confirmation from the production booth that they had captured clear video evidence of the signaling behavior. The decision was made to allow the round to proceed so they could document the pattern definitively before confronting Thomas about what they had observed. The question appeared on the board asking contestants to name something people do to prepare for a job interview. Thomas glanced toward Emily's section of the audience. Emily held up 3 fingers in a gesture that could have appeared to casual observers as simply resting her hand on the armrest in front of her. Thomas buzzed in first and confidently answered with the 3rd most common answer, research the company, rather than giving the more obvious top answer of practice interview questions or prepare resume. His answer was indeed the number 3 answer on the board, earning 18 points. The specificity of Thomas choosing the 3rd ranked answer rather than attempting the most obvious response raised additional red flags for the production team. Combined with the clear video evidence of signaling, they had sufficient grounds to stop the game and address what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to cheat. Steve Harvey, who had not been informed of the observations during the active gameplay to avoid affecting his natural hosting demeanor, was given an urgent message through his earpiece as the round concluded. He was told that the producers needed to speak with him immediately before proceeding further. Steve called for a brief pause and stepped away to confer with the production team. When Steve returned to the stage 3 minutes later, his demeanor had transformed completely. The warmth and humor that characterized his typical hosting style had been replaced by an expression of serious disappointment and controlled anger. He stood at center stage and addressed everyone present with unmistakable gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation that has never occurred in the history of Family Feud. We have clear evidence that one of our contestants has been receiving signals from a family member in the audience to gain an unfair advantage in answering questions. This is cheating. This is a violation of the rules that every contestant agrees to when they come on this show. And we are going to address this right now, publicly, because integrity matters more than entertainment. The studio went completely silent. Thomas's face showed a flash of panic before he attempted to compose himself into an expression of confused innocence. His family members looked at each other in shock and confusion, clearly unaware of what Steve was describing. Steve walked directly up to Thomas, his movement deliberate and his expression conveying deep disappointment. "Thomas, I am going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to understand that we have video evidence of what has been happening. So you have a choice right now about whether to tell the truth or to compound your cheating with lying. Have you been receiving signals from someone in the audience to help you answer questions?" Thomas's immediate response was denial delivered with practiced indignation. "Steve, I have no idea what you are talking about. I have not been cheating. This is outrageous. I am a high school teacher. I teach my students about integrity every day. I would never cheat on a game show." Steve's response was immediate and uncompromising. "Thomas, we have video footage of you repeatedly looking at a specific section of the audience before giving your answers. We have video footage of a young woman in that section making hand signals that correspond to the ranking of answers on the board. And we have documented that your answers have been suspiciously specific, choosing third or fourth ranked answers rather than the most obvious top answers. So I am going to ask you again, and I am telling you that we have evidence. Are you going to continue lying, or are you going to tell the truth about what you have been doing?" Thomas's wife Karen spoke up, her voice filled with confusion and growing concern. "Steve, I do not understand what is happening. Thomas, what is he talking about? Have you been doing something?" Before Thomas could respond, Steve made a decision that would become one of the defining moments of his hosting career. He gestured to the production booth and asked them to play the compiled footage on the studio monitors so that everyone present, including both families and the audience, could see exactly what had been captured. The footage played on the large screens, showing clear sequences of Thomas glancing toward the audience, Emily making hand signals, and Thomas then providing answers that corresponded precisely to the number of fingers Emily had displayed. The evidence was unambiguous and damning. There was no way to interpret what the footage showed as anything other than deliberate coordination to gain unfair advantage. Karen's face crumbled as she watched the footage. She turned to Thomas with an expression of betrayal and disappointment that cut deeper than any words could have. "Thomas, how could you do this? How could you cheat and then lie about it? How could you involve Emily in this without telling any of us? This is exactly what I have been trying to tell you about for years. Your need to win has crossed a line that I cannot accept." Thomas's son David, who had been watching the footage with visible distress, spoke with a voice that trembled with emotion. "Dad, you teach us about honesty. You punish me when I lie about small things. You gave me a lecture last month about academic integrity, and you were cheating on television. You were cheating and you tried to lie about it when you got caught." ACT4THETURNERONDs 12:16 minutes. Steve Harvey stood in the center of the stage, having just exposed Thomas's cheating to everyone present. The moment required a response that would address not just the immediate violation but the broader questions about integrity, consequences, and what happens when someone's actions fundamentally contradict their stated values. Steve made a decision about how to proceed that would become one of the most discussed moments in game show history. He turned to Thomas with an expression that combined disappointment, anger, and something that might have been pity. "Thomas, you are a teacher. You stand in front of students every day and you teach them about mathematics, but more importantly, whether you realize it or not, you teach them about character. You model for them what it means to be an educated, principled adult. And what you just modeled here is that someone can speak eloquently about integrity while actively violating it when they think they will not be caught." Steve's voice grew stronger as he continued. But here is what I want you to understand. The worst thing you did today was not the cheating itself. People make mistakes. People give in to temptation. What makes your actions particularly damaging is that when you were confronted with clear evidence of what you had done, your first instinct was to lie, to look me in the eye and deny something that we had on video, to invoke your profession as a teacher as proof of your integrity while actively demonstrating that you have none. Thomas attempted to interject with an explanation, but Steve held up his hand firmly. No, you have had your chance to speak, and you chose to use that chance to lie. Now you are going to listen. You are going to listen to what your wife and your son just said to you. You are going to listen to what I am about to tell you, and then you are going to make a decision about who you want to be, because the person you have been showing us today is not someone worthy of respect or trust. Steve turned to address the audience and the cameras directly. Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing something important here. We are watching what happens when someone who has built their entire identity around being intelligent and principled gets caught doing something that reveals those qualities to be superficial. Thomas thought he was smarter than our production team. He thought he could cheat without being detected. And when he got caught, he thought he could lie his way out of the consequences. He continued with measured intensity. But here is the truth about integrity. It is not about what you do when people are watching. It is about what you do when you think no one will find out. Thomas revealed today that when he thinks he can get away with cheating, he will cheat. When he thinks he can get away with lying, he will lie. That is not a momentary lapse in judgment. That is a character deficiency that has probably been present for a very long time. Karen spoke up, her voice steady despite obvious emotional distress. Steve, you are right. This is not new. I have seen versions of this behavior throughout our marriage. Thomas cannot stand to lose. He will bend rules, argue technicalities, and apparently now he will outright cheat rather than accept that someone else might be better at something than he is. I have tried to address this with him for years, but he always has some justification for why his behavior is acceptable. Maybe this public confrontation is what he needs to finally face the truth about himself. Steve nodded at Karen with visible respect for her honesty. Then he turned back to Thomas with a direct question. Thomas, I am going to give you one opportunity to respond honestly, not to make excuses, not to minimize what you did, but to actually take accountability for your actions. Can you do that? Thomas stood there, his carefully constructed self-image crumbling under the weight of public exposure. When he finally spoke, his voice was defensive and filled with rationalizations. I wanted to win. I saw an opportunity to gain an advantage and I took it. Yes, I should not have done it. Yes, I should not have lied when you confronted me. But this is being blown out of proportion. It is a game show. The stakes are not that high. I made a mistake in judgment, but I am not a terrible person. Steve's response was immediate and cutting. No, Thomas, you do not get to minimize this. You do not get to say the stakes are not that high. You cheated. You involved your daughter in cheating without apparently caring about what that would teach her about integrity. You lied to my face when confronted with evidence, and now you are standing here trying to make yourself the victim of disproportionate criticism. That is not accountability. That is deflection and excuse-making. He continued with building intensity. And you know what the highest stakes are here? Not the prize money, not winning or losing a game. The highest stakes are the message you are sending to your son who is standing right there watching his father get caught cheating and then refuse to take genuine responsibility for it. David is learning right now what kind of man his father is. He is learning that when you get caught doing wrong, you minimize and deflect rather than owning your choices. That is the real cost of what you have done today. David, who had been silent since his initial response to the footage, spoke again with a maturity beyond his 15 years. Dad, just admit what you did. Just say you were wrong without making excuses. That is all anyone wants to hear. But you cannot do it, can you? You cannot just say that you messed up and you are sorry. You always have to explain why it is not as bad as it seems or why other people are overreacting. The words from his son seemed to penetrate Thomas's defenses in a way that Steve's confrontation had not. For the first time, Thomas's expression showed something other than defensiveness or rationalization. It showed pain and the beginning recognition of how his behavior appeared to the people whose opinions should matter most to him. Steve made a decision in that moment about how to proceed. "Thomas, here is what is going to happen. You and your family are disqualified from this competition. You will receive no prize money. The footage of your cheating and your initial denial will be included in the episode that airs because hiding it would be dishonest and would deny our viewers the opportunity to see what happens when someone violates the trust of this show. You will also be banned from ever appearing on any show I host in the future." He paused to let the consequences sink in before continuing. "But I am going to offer you something as well. I am going to offer you the opportunity to use this moment as a catalyst for genuine change, rather than just a humiliating experience you want to forget. If you are willing to actually do the work of examining why you thought cheating was acceptable, why lying came so naturally to you when you got caught, and why you have such a pathological need to win that you will sacrifice your integrity to achieve it, then maybe something valuable can come from this disaster." Steve's voice softened slightly, but maintained its seriousness. "I am going to personally connect you with people who work with individuals who struggle with integrity issues and pathological competitiveness. I am going to make resources available to you and your family to work through the damage this has caused to your relationships. But Thomas, you have to actually want to change. You have to be willing to face the truth about yourself rather than continuing to rationalize and minimize your behavior. Are you capable of doing that?" Thomas stood there, and for the first time since being confronted, he appeared to genuinely absorb the gravity of what had happened and what was being offered to him. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its defensive edge and carried the beginning notes of genuine remorse. "I do not know if I am capable of it, but I know I need to try. You are right. Everything you said is right. I did cheat. I did lie. I did involve my daughter without caring about what it would teach her. And when David asked me to just admit what I did without excuses, I could not do it because making excuses is what I always do. I am sorry. I am genuinely sorry, and I do not know how to fix this, but I want to try." ACT 50. THE Lee JCY's 1625 minutes. When the episode aired 12 weeks later, it included the complete unedited confrontation with careful framing about integrity, competition, and the consequences of cheating. The network received extensive legal review to ensure that broadcasting Thomas's cheating and subsequent disqualification did not create liability issues. Ultimately, the decision was made to air the full segment with Thomas's consent, which he provided as part of his commitment to accountability and using his failure as a teaching opportunity. The response was immediate and divided. Many viewers applauded Steve Harvey's handling of the situation, praising his refusal to allow the cheating to be minimized or swept under the rug. Teachers across the country used the clip in their classrooms to discuss academic integrity and the consequences of cheating. Parents showed the episode to their children as an example of how cheating damages not just the competition, but the cheater's relationships and self-respect. However, some viewers felt that Steve's response had been too harsh, that publicly humiliating Thomas served no constructive purpose, and that private disqualification would have been more appropriate than televised confrontation. The debate raged on social media and in opinion columns about whether public accountability was justice or cruelty, whether Thomas deserved a second chance or permanent stigma, and whether Steve Harvey had the right to position himself as moral arbiter in the situation. Thomas, to his credit, followed through on his commitment to Steve Harvey. He entered therapy specifically focused on his competitive pathology and his pattern of rationalizing unethical behavior. He participated in a follow-up interview that aired 6 months after the original episode, where he discussed what he had learned about himself and the work he was doing to change his behavior patterns. During that follow-up interview, Thomas demonstrated genuine growth and self-awareness that had been completely absent during the original confrontation. "When Steve Harvey exposed my cheating on Family Feud, I thought my life was over. I thought I would lose my job, lose my family, and be permanently defined by that moment of failure. but what actually happened was more complicated and ultimately more valuable than I could have imagined. He continued with hard-won insight. I did not lose my job, but I did have to face a disciplinary hearing where my school district reviewed the incident and determined whether my behavior undermined my credibility as an educator. They ultimately kept me employed, but required that I participate in professional ethics training and that I be transparent with my students about what had happened and what I was learning from it. That transparency has been the hardest and most valuable part of this entire experience. Thomas described how he had addressed the incident with his students, showing them the Family Feud footage and leading discussions about integrity, the temptation to cheat, and the damage that dishonesty causes to relationships and self-respect. My students were remarkably honest with me about their own struggles with academic integrity. They told me about times they had cheated on tests or plagiarized papers. They told me about the pressure they felt to achieve and how that pressure sometimes made cheating feel like a necessary evil. And we had real conversations about why those rationalizations are dangerous and how to resist them. The follow-up interview revealed that Thomas's marriage had survived the incident but had required intensive couples therapy and a fundamental renegotiation of trust. Karen spoke candidly about her decision to remain married to Thomas despite the public humiliation and the confirmation of behavior patterns she had been trying to address for years. I stayed because I saw genuine change, Karen explained. Not immediate change and not easy change, but real transformation in how Thomas approached competition, failure, and his need to be superior to others. He started acknowledging when other people had better ideas than his. He stopped arguing with referees at our son's games. He began giving credit to colleagues for their contributions to shared projects. These might sound like small things, but they represented fundamental shifts in his character. David, now 16 years old, offered his own perspective on his father's transformation with the insight of someone who had witnessed both the failure and the recovery process. When my dad got caught cheating on Family Feud, I was so angry at him. Not just because he cheated, but because he embodied everything he had always told me was wrong. He became a hypocrite right in front of everyone. But watching him actually do the work to change, watching him be honest about his failures with his students and with our family, that taught me something valuable too. It taught me that making terrible mistakes does not have to define you if you are willing to genuinely face them and change. 1 year after the episode aired, Steve Harvey invited Thomas and his family to return for a special segment on his talk show dedicated to stories of redemption after public failure. The segment featured multiple individuals who had experienced public humiliation for their mistakes and had used those experiences as catalysts for genuine transformation. Thomas shared the stage with people who had committed various failures, from infidelity exposed publicly to financial fraud discovered by employers to addiction that had destroyed careers. During that segment, Steve reflected on his decision to confront Thomas so directly and publicly. I have had a year to think about whether I handled that situation correctly. Some people told me I was too harsh. Some said I should not have aired the footage at all. But I keep coming back to the same conclusion. If I had let Thomas's cheating slide, if I had quietly disqualified him without addressing what he had done, I would have sent a message that cheating is acceptable as long as you do not get caught publicly. That would have been wrong. He continued with conviction. Thomas needed to face consequences. He needed to have his behavior exposed so that he could not minimize it or rationalize it away. That public exposure was painful for him and his family, but it created accountability that private consequences never could have achieved. And based on what I have seen over this past year, that accountability saved him from continuing down a path of escalating dishonesty that would have eventually destroyed everything he valued. 5 years later, Thomas had become an unexpected advocate for academic integrity and ethical education. He spoke at schools, teacher conferences, and youth programs about his experience, using his public failure as a teaching tool about the long-term costs of cheating and the importance of integrity even when facing pressure to succeed. His presentations always included the Family Feud footage, and he never minimized or made excuses for his behavior. During one presentation at an educational conference, Thomas shared the lesson that had emerged from his experience. "I spent 15 years as a teacher telling students not to cheat while I was someone who would cheat when given the opportunity. That hypocrisy was exposed on national television in the most humiliating way possible, but that humiliation forced me to confront a truth about myself that I had been avoiding my entire life. I valued winning more than I valued integrity. I valued appearing competent more than I valued being honest. And those misplaced values were destroying my relationships and corrupting my character." He continued with hard-earned wisdom. "The students I work with now face incredible pressure to succeed. They face pressure from parents, from colleges, from society, and from themselves. And in the face of that pressure, cheating can seem like a reasonable shortcut to the outcomes they need. What I try to help them understand is that cheating does not just risk getting caught. It fundamentally damages your relationship with yourself. It teaches you that your success is built on deception, and that knowledge corrodes your self-respect and your ability to trust your own achievements." 10 years after that memorable Family Feud episode, a comprehensive study was published examining the impact of Steve Harvey's confrontation of Thomas on attitudes toward cheating in academic and competitive settings. The researchers found that schools which incorporated the clip into their integrity education programs saw measurable decreases in self-reported cheating behavior and increases in students' willingness to confront peers who were cheating. The study also examined the long-term outcomes for Thomas himself as a case study in redemption after public moral failure. The researchers documented his sustained transformation, including his continued work as an educator with enhanced focus on character development, his ongoing therapy and personal development work, and his advocacy for integrity education. They concluded that public accountability, while painful and controversial, had created conditions for genuine change that private consequences might not have achieved. A documentary was produced examining the cultural impact of the incident and the broader questions it raised about cheating, consequences, and redemption. The documentary featured interviews with educators, psychologists, ethicists, and individuals who had experienced their own public failures and subsequent transformation. Thomas and his family participated extensively, providing insight into what the past decade had meant for their relationships and their understanding of integrity. In the documentary's closing scene, Steve Harvey and Thomas appear together to reflect on the incident and its aftermath. Steve speaks first, offering perspective shaped by a decade of reflection. "When I confronted Thomas about his cheating, I was angry. I felt betrayed because contestants come on my show and they represent themselves as honest people competing fairly. But I also felt responsible for addressing the violation publicly, because I knew that how I responded would send a message about whether cheating has real consequences or just risks getting caught. I chose to prioritize accountability over comfort, and I believe that was the right choice, even though it was difficult for everyone involved." Thomas provides his final reflection with humility that comes from sustained self-examination and growth. 10 years ago, I was caught cheating on Family Feud. Steve Harvey exposed my behavior, disqualified me from the competition, and confronted me with truths about my character that I had spent my entire life avoiding. That confrontation was the worst and the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the worst because it humiliated me publicly and damaged relationships I valued. But it was the best because it forced me to finally face the gap between who I claimed to be and who I actually was. That reckoning saved me from a life of escalating dishonesty that would have eventually destroyed everything I cared about. The documentary ends with a powerful montage of students, teachers, and parents discussing how the Family Feud incident influenced their thinking about integrity, accountability, and the possibility of genuine transformation after moral failure. The final statistic reveals that over 8,000 educators have incorporated the clip into their character education curricula, reaching an estimated 3 million students with lessons about the costs of cheating and the importance of maintaining integrity even when facing pressure to succeed. As the screen fades to black, a final message appears that captures the essential lesson. Integrity is not about perfection. It is about honesty when you fail, accountability when you are caught, and genuine commitment to becoming better than you were. The measure of character is not whether you make mistakes, but what you do after the mistake is exposed. The story of Thomas Bradley's attempt to cheat on Family Feud and Steve Harvey's uncompromising response reminds us that integrity matters more than winning, that public accountability can create conditions for genuine transformation, and that the courage to face our moral failures honestly is the beginning of redemption. Their confrontation demonstrated that real consequences for dishonest behavior are not cruelty, but necessary accountability, that change requires more than words and requires sustained commitment to different choices, and that sometimes the most valuable thing someone with a platform can do is refuse to allow wrongdoing to be minimized or dismissed, even when doing so creates discomfort for everyone involved. If this story resonated with you and reminded you that integrity is the foundation of all meaningful achievement, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share these powerful moments because they challenge us to examine our own relationship with honesty and inspire us to choose integrity even when facing pressure to compromise our values. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that the shortcuts we take to avoid difficulty or ensure success ultimately undermine the very achievements we are pursuing. Remember that genuine accomplishment requires honest effort, that our character is revealed in how we respond when facing temptation to cheat, and that the respect we receive from others begins with the integrity we maintain when we think no one is watching.